So hi guys there out in YouTube land who are catching the bounce of the Zoom call, which we're just about to start, of original, this 13th of April 2025. And I will switch us over to Zoom now. So Alex Del Castillo, you're up first. You were going to show me something.
Oh yeah, I'm such a klutz with this Zoom on my phone. Let me swap over to. All right, you can see me.
I can see you perfectly. Thank you.
All right. So on my desk out here, or on my deck out here, I've had this little grill. You see that?
Yeah, I can see it. Like yeah. It's a little out of focus, but I can imagine it's one of those garden sort of barbecue things.
It's a Komodo style, egg-shaped grill.
Yeah.
And my thinking is, if we put a ring between the lid and the body with nozzles in it, we could do an external boiler setup and start fiddling around making a little tiny Windex. It's even got holes in the top and the bottom, and I expect that we can get multi-axis shear and start to see if we can do anything.
So I'm going to give this to you right now. This was an approach to, you mentioned earlier, and I've mentioned before similar ideas, to use the sort of combine the Armstrong electrostatic boiler, which I've discussed in a recent call in some length with regard to my views on the Thunderstorm generator. I had an idea to create a miniature Armstrong electrostatic boiler. And this may in fact be the easiest way to create high voltage sparks. And what I propose is, when I was looking at other linear reactors many moons ago, I created a reactor called Usherenko. I created the 3D models for it. And in the process of doing that, I think I created a bill of materials. He was a sponsor in the early years of the project. But the idea was that it was a additive manufacturing process to create the reactor, which was a drawer where you put the fuel either side, and you just have one weld seam, which you could do with a laser weld. And in there was a keyway, and into the keyway you put a boron nitride encased tungsten filament ceramic heater. Of course, boron nitride we know is very good, or rather boron is, for absorbing the energy and stuff, and also that may or may not be coming out of this process. But when I was thinking of rebuilding the Armstrong electrostatic boiler in miniature, I thought, well, we don't actually need, like they needed in the 1820s, 1830s, a large hydrocarbon, wood burning or coal burning boiler to create the steam. All we need to do is to be able to intensely create supercritical water and then pump it through that circuitous route, and then through the very good insulating cavijet type of nozzle, in order to create the soliton, the flashing of that water as it comes into the low pressure to steam, the focusing using the electrodynamics of the synthesized electrons, and in their view, friction created electrons. And of course, there are even recent papers now about the vast amount of electricity that water produces as it rolls over a surface. There's also this thing you might recall called red mercury. And I've discussed it in the past, but in fact, red mercury is actually where mercury is spun in a glass beaker, and it kind of sticks and then snaps off the glass beaker. And as it does, it creates charge separation that creates an arc and then a glow, and it glows red. So you can imagine people showing this in a dark room. This is red mercury. Look, it's red and it's mercury. But actually, it was discovered by, I think, a Frenchman called Picard. And it's exactly spelt like Jean-Luc Picard. And I think it might even be Jean-Luc that you can go and look up on Wikipedia. I've spoken about it in the past.
No coincidence.
Yeah, well, is it a quinky dink or not? I don't know. So I've often thought that maybe actually red mercury spinning in a glass vessel. If you go and look, there's a guy, I don't know whether it's the same Putterman that does cavitation, but I think it's at the same institute in California. They actually did an article some years ago, or maybe it's even this year, I don't know. But anyway, they decided that the glowing effect in the red glow of mercury as it moves around inside a glass vessel is. Can anyone on the table there guess what they concluded it is?
I heard something. I don't think it's this, but I heard somebody talk about it being iron or even a transmutation effect of iron or something. I don't buy that.
No. Anyone else have a guess? Anyone want to put the hand up and have a guess? Anyone in on YouTube want to have a guess? What they decided it was? Herman Dalton is saying plasma. Kind of, if the thing occurs, yes.
A thermal effect of some sort.
No, but thank you for your contribution. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd guess plasma as well.
Okay, so the move is plasma. Well, certainly it is plasma that causes the glow, but the thing that causes the formation of the plasma is created by the charge separation. And you know what they conclude it is? Static electricity.
Yeah.
Which means if a UFO used spinning mercury in a glass vessel, it would be creating exotic vacuum objects, charge clusters in the process of doing that, which I believe are critical to this technology. But they are the thing that has been concluded, maybe even in recent days and in months, maybe years, to be the thing that causes this effect discovered by Picard. So that's a bit of a turnout for the book. So that, whether you agree that the flashing to steam and the massive charge separation, the ripping part of those water molecules is creating static electricity, which gets focused into the solitons. Certainly, the solitons in an Armstrong electrostatic boiler are shooting towards a pin, and the pin is pointing into the center of the torus of the soliton that's heading towards it. And in the center of the torus is where we argue the charge clusters charge. Mostly. And so it imparts that cloud. And of course, you can imagine the steam must be dry if it's supercritical when it becomes a gas. And so it's not going to be carrying away the charge there. So it gets dumped on the charge accumulator. And then it can produce up to 2-foot sparks. And we have some beautiful video that we took in the Newcastle Engineering Museum of an Armstrong electrostatic boiler. And we also visited their archives. We had a couple of hours with the people who curate this device and one that's also in some castles. And it was very clear to us that in the attempt to make this thing look pretty, they had reconstructed it in a non-correct way. So we got tentative agreement from them that when the time arises, we would have full access and touchy-feely access to it out of hours, and also be invited to go and access the one that is in this castle. So these are two devices we may have contact with. I don't know whether we need to do that to be able to get to a point where we can create the effect. So just to go over it again, the idea I had is to use one of these boron nitride ceramics. They come in like card-sized, various widths, but sort of credit card-sized heater plates. Obviously, they heat from both sides. The reason you need the tungsten filament in there is that over 1,000 degrees it starts heating. Now, you want it to get to what tungsten can do, which is quite high. It can go 2,500 degrees like a tungsten filament light bulb, and you're good all the time with that. So that is going to have the capability to massively supercritically heat water in a chamber and then put it through. So your actual Armstrong electrostatic boiler could be little more than the nozzle with this heater and a water supply. And what I imagine to do then would be, firstly, this could be a static electricity generator So you could have a device that is basically you plug it into the mains and pour water in it, screw a nozzle down, and it starts producing fantastic amounts of static electricity in a totally novel way compared to a Van de Graaff generator and a Tesla coil, and much more easy to conceptualize when you understand what it could be doing. Then secondly, you put these into the Thunderstorm generator, and you know you're injecting vast amounts of static electricity into the vortex in the temperature range, which forces all of these electrodynamics to occur. And so, yeah, I think that's how I would approach it. That's how I would approach it. And they're not, I mean, they are reasonably pricey. I don't know if you could pot your own, like buy some high temperature heater wire like Cantal and pot your own ceramics to do that. I don't know. But these things are off the shelf. And if they're off the shelf, then this could be a very reliable method. Certainly a lot more easy to produce than using a diesel generator and using the flue gases from that and the heat to heat water and so on. I mean, when you create steam, supercritical high pressure water to steam, that in itself produces an incredible jet speed. It's a phenomenal expansion rate, 1,617 times the volume of the water, and that could produce a jet of gas that is suitable for actually creating the vortex itself on its own. You might not need the pumps that we've had to buy in order to test the more traditional approach. And you might even be able to miniaturize this down into a household appliance, which would be utterly crazy.
I did something like that on my car back in the 80s with my sort of pre-geek.
Can I just pause? Someone's come to the obvious conclusion. Ian McClelland, yes, that is what I'm essentially gifting, is that I think we could replace the bubbler and the ionizer of the Thunderstorm generator with the same kind of solution. Yes. So sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I agree. You can superheat the fluid however you're going to heat it, and then pump it in the liquid state into the nozzle, and then when it comes out, it flashes to the steam.
Yeah.
So yeah, you don't even need a boiler.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what I did with gas. Yeah. But I mean, you know, speaking of the Thunderstorm generator, and I don't mean to hijack the whole thing, but I did a copper tube around an iron exhaust header, filled that with gas, and got effects on a big old V8. You know, back in the old days, and subsequent, you know, I didn't really know what I was doing then, but you know, over the course of the years and watching Adair and learning, I think that the part of what was going on might have been there was a copper oxide inside the copper tubing, and maybe we were getting something going on with the little loops in the copper oxide.
Yeah, right.
And that's something we're going to explore too.
Fascinating. Yeah. Experiment, but more importantly, share.
Well, that's why I'm talking.
I've been sitting on that idea with those ceramics, which I think it was 2014 that I did that design. But immediately when I saw it, and I've been sitting on it, and I'm thinking, I've got to find an appropriate time to get this out the door, because I don't want an idea dying with me because I have an accident. and even though it is surprisingly obvious once you've been told it, people don't think about these things.
That's how you know it's a good idea.
Well, maybe. I don't know. But like, when you reduce something down to its absolute bare essentials, things like that become obvious. And so, yeah, having access to solitons that can carry intense charges to a destination that are themselves part of the same kind of structure you're trying to create is wonderful. Because I mean, we could highly directionalize these, and it's literally a case of combining the cavijet with the Armstrong electrostatic boiler and these new, because when the Armstrong electrostatic boiler was made, no one had had any means to generate electricity. You know what I mean? Other than dripping water.
Yeah.
that was it. And rubbing amber. You know, the Greek word for amber is electron. But the electron hadn't been discovered.
I think Volta was doing something with batteries by then. But
yeah, I guess that's generating electricity. Yeah, but like not high voltage. I guess if you track a lot of them in series. No. Yeah, but in no serious way were people able to generate. Certainly, they weren't thinking about high temperature resistance coils. It just wasn't even an option back then, and it's surprising to me that no one has revisited that idea. Completely surprising to me. And so when I'm joking about making a steam-powered UFO, this is kind of what I've had in my mind. Something like an Armstrong electrostatic boiler combined with a cavijet, combined with a Windex. And I think we could do it in a nice type of wood. And I think it's going to fly.
This old destroyerman is very partial to steam anyway, because you can see it, and you know it's simple, and you know you don't have to have PN junctions or anything like that. So yeah, I'm all about it.
So Alex, did you see the rather shocking to me Standeo video that I shared in this?
I just started it, but I'm familiar with all that crap. So,
oh really? Okay. So here's the thing. At one point in that video, he says. He gives this description of having these two large ferrite magnets around an electric rod that's discharging in between, and he calls this the O Lorentz effect. And he literally puts O in quotes. So that's why I put O original, not if you're a remote viewer. This is why I often say I don't believe I'm inventing anything new, because I know I can see other people's things. So like I can't own it. So it just has to be put out there because is it just a channel?
Yeah, but I get my ideas the same way, or it's subtle, but it's the same thing. It just pops in, and you know it's not yours, but you see it's brilliant. I don't know. Yeah, I get it.
So here's the thing. He said that he knew T.T. Brown. He visited with him several times. He actually has some original video of his work, but he kind of basically said something along the lines, I felt sorry for him because he was doing the, you know, dissimilar sized capacitors and using heterodyne resonance, and that is the only time I have heard that term heterodyne resonance with respect to non-emission of mass propulsion, other than in Stoyan-Sarg's non-emission of mass propulsion system that he has videos of.
You know, it's funny you say heterodyne, because heterodyning, I've been meaning to bring it up and beat the table about it too.
Right. But the other thing he said is what T. Townsend Brown was missing was that you need to recirculate your ions into a vortex torus. And then he said that the way all of these systems work is it produces a tornado into the center and a vortex around that. And I thought, there we go. I rest my case.
Well, I think Brown sussed that out.
Adair was basically saying he absolutely didn't.
I know, but those guys were all stovepiped.
Right.
He talked about LeMay, and LeMay, I don't know if you ever heard of this guy called David Adair, but he tells a whole long crazy story along the same lines with
So I heard about David Adair for the first time from Yin Gazda. She was sitting in my kitchen, and she was telling me she had met David Adair recently, and she wanted to give him one of these books, Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse. And indeed, there is a photo of David Adair holding one of these books, which I personally gave to him and signed. And so, yes, I heard the story, and essentially I mentioned it in brief. And he said that apparently when he was 17, he went to the White Sands missile base, and he had a little device and he tested it, and he turned. There were people there from the basically Nazis from the paperclip program, and I presume, I don't know, that wasn't actually what was said, but they said they were basically Nazis.
Yeah.
And he turned this device on, and it basically disappeared. But they could see from radar that it had gone vertically up at Mach 37.
Yeah, he made a rocket engine that looks like it used Leonard, like an
rocket engine.
It was a rocket. It was a rocket. It was a miss. He was a rocketeer.
Right.
He was a motorhead before that. I've watched a lot of his interviews and things, and for what it's worth, when he was describing things, it sounded like the truth to me from stuff that I knew firsthand and had also witnessed. So, including like the prosaic stuff about turning wrenches and everything. But it was very intriguing because. And he said that he channeled that information or got it from like an alien friend or something.
I think that's the only way to essentially get these understandings. But,
did you hear the part about the story where they showed him the spaceship underground and everything at White Sands?
I haven't. No.
I mean, it gets bonkers from there.
We're always up for a little bit crazy, aren't we? So whilst you got the floor, tell us what's bonkers. Because I've got a few ideas myself.
I've just enough for the background of me, just so you can judge what I say based on what I've seen. I was a naval reactor operator and then a destroyerman in the Navy, and I'm very familiar with military gear. I never that I know of have been to any of this stuff, but I was involved in some of these remote viewing programs too when I was a kid. So when I heard Adair thing, he talks about, and it's out there on YouTube, you can find it. After he launched that rocket, and then he landed it somewhere, and it was somewhat inconvenient for one of the Nazis. I forget which one it was. So they took him down and said, "Hey, we've got this ship we need you to look at," and it was apparently a shot down alien vessel, different from a lot of the ones we've heard about, and that supposedly was ancient, and it had an AI and an engine, and apparently the consciousness from the AI hitchhiked into this guy, David Adair's mind, and they were coexisting, and that's the thing had been reaching out to him and downloading him ideas so that he would end up getting picked up and be there. And then I forget the name of the alien, but Adair is pals with this alien, and there's hours and hours of video. I couldn't do justice to it, but if you're looking at it from a Leonard point of view and the things that he describes, it kind of tracks. It's like Aristotle said, an educated person can look at an idea he doesn't necessarily believe and analyze it. I mean, I put him out there with Brown, and then further over time, I'm starting to go yeah, these guys were onto something. Likewise, the Philadelphia experiment and a lot of stuff this guy Al Bielek was talking about. There's a real
I'm in the debate as to whether I will talk about teleportation at the Cosmic Summit. It's where I'm thinking I might talk. It will include some discussion of the Philadelphia experiment, if we assume it's correct. But from what one would understand about the Philadelphia experiment, the going somewhere and coming back exactly to where it came from is exactly in line with my understanding of what I believe the teleportation will allow you to do. And secondly, obviously the blending of some of the people inside the craft, the ship rather, is totally logic because of the way your space-time gets mixed up with everything else's space-time in certain parts of the structure.
Yeah, what really resonated with me, pun intended, I was in charge of taking care of the degaussing systems in my ships at various points, and we never used them. But there were all this heavy-duty gear and stuff, and I always wondered. And I've also discovered things on the radars where there's a switch inside that phase conjugates it.
Right.
It's in the tech manual. It's not. I mean, it's in the schematics, but there's no description of the operation.
There's just a switch,
and I
and no
remember
one tells
finding
you
it. I
to
was
switch it on.
It's on the board. I mean, and I was like, I was a lab assistant tech instructor at Nuclear Field A School for the ANSPS 64 Tech V9 Raytheon Surface Search Radar, and that one had this mystery switch, and it was one of those. I asked the boss because, like, I mean, I knew this thing like the back of my hand, and I'm like, what the fuck does this do? I don't know. Don't touch it. They don't talk about it. I looked at it, and it turns out it phase conjugates.
Right.
Takes something and brings it out, phase shifts it and brings it back together.
Yeah.
No explanation of why that was, and that was another thing. Like, you know, I'd already made my thing with the car, and then I saw this, and I put it, and it's just like, well, that's interesting. And then later on, we start to realize, you know, you hear from Bearden, phase conjugation is where it's at, and it kind of clicked for me when you did the little video with the coin going down the hole. I visualize the phase conjugation is like when they're canceling out or each other, then
you're getting
the
that
energy's got to go.
point, and
it's got to go
going
normal.
down like that.
It's got to go somewhere else,
Yeah.
And that's the. I mean, I hold that loosely in my mind, and I'm not trying to argue what's really happening, but it works for me. Anywho, there is also a rumor in the Navy, and I've seen similar to, like, you know, it used to be that the B-2 uses this technology. We all know that's the case now, but
there's certainly some agreement
in the old
that
days,
it uses
you know,
some
10 years ago,
charge, right?
Right. Okay. So, somewhat similarly, the Minesweeper class, I think it's called Osprey. I forget the name. Well, not whatever. Whatever the newer Navy Minesweeper class is, supposedly has the capability to teleport. That's a rumor I've heard, and because I've got firsthand experience with naval ships and operations, there are things that make me wonder about that because of, like, how they would appear places. Supposedly they ship them. They say they put them on ships and move them there, but I'd never seen it done. But
they've got ships to move the ships,
Yeah, because they're minesweepers. They're not like ocean-going vessels. And if you need them to be in the Mediterranean, right. But then they just showed up. I don't know, but I mean, I've seen some. I've been, like, adjacent to some stuff in the Navy, and like I was with DevGru, or guys who were from the SEAL development group, and they'd talk about the pyramids underwater in Cuba and a lot of other stuff. That's so.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to dive down there in the right equipment.
But there's definitely. I mean, they're telling sea stories to me about, like, the pyramids and all the crazy shit down there. But there's other stuff too.
That is one advantage if you have a submarine and you're bored. Let's just go around Cuba a bit and see what's down there.
I was almost assigned as the officer in charge of AUTEC, which is basically the Navy's Area 51.
Right.
But instead, they shipped me over to NAVSCIATS, which was basically the Navy's School of the Americas. We didn't torture anybody, but that's where
everyone's thinking about it, though.
That's where all the SEAL guys were. I was the XO.
Yeah.
And so these guys would just be telling stories or talking to each other, and, you know, they've been around a lot of this stuff, and there's a lot of tech, and also I've got questions about the submarines, which I was trained to, you know, be the reactor operator of, but nobody ever goes into the reactor compartment. We don't really know, as an operator or a mechanic, what's going on in there. That could be a black box that's doing something else. I don't know, or at least I don't have firsthand experience of that, like the radar. Even though they trained us and told us what it's like, but you never can see it. So who knows? Maybe. And then I've heard rumors that they actually convert the subs into you know, spaceships. That it was pretty trivial. I don't mean to take all your time. But
certainly they're well-designed pressure positive, pressure negative vessels, aren't they? So like that, if you're going to make something, they even say that, you know, the ARV is basically a diving bell. the core sphere it uses the same kind of, like, submarine technology.
Well, I've heard that they've gone well beyond that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well beyond
Yeah.
it.
Well,
I just want to make a win hex right now. I mean, I think that's the move. Or
win hex, yeah, and I think to miniaturize and simplify is the way to go. I would like to see if really there is the destruction zone, which I believe there will be. If we can create these miniature, high pressure, high charge separated,
I wanted to build one.
I reckon we can build a device that is handheld and it's like an airbrush.
Yeah, like
and
a
you
Dremel.
can literally carve stone with it.
Kind of like in that movie with Sam Jackson, that Marvel movie where he cuts out the bottom of the car and then cuts through the street.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
It's funny because those Marvel movies actually, a lot of the, technology and how they describe it is very similar to what we end up finding. There's one where
I actually can't watch them because I keep thinking, well, that's possible, that's possible, that's possible, that's possible, and I just find it tedious. I find it is just negative propaganda. It's designed to be put out there, and someone would pretend that they're doing it so that people are ready for the technology when they see it, they're not scared by it. But actually, I think more, it's so that when people invent the technology, someone could just come along and say, and most people do, they're just crazy. They think they've invented that thing I saw in the Marvel movie. I
mean, there's shows that come out that are that way.
Right.
I swear to God. I've had personal experience with some of this stuff, remote viewing things and the programs, and like Stranger Things and Severance.
Mm-hmm.
They came out later, but that's exactly what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what was going on.
Right.
And
I've heard a lot of things about Stranger Things, but I've never actually watched a single episode.
Yeah.
And I choose not to. That's why I choose not to watch superhero movies, because I think they are disabling media. They're disabling of people actually generating the things that can do the things.
Well, at least for me, I use it as confirmation almost, because the MacGuffin for time travel in one of the shows was a Mobius strip. And I'm like, didn't we have that thing with the Mobius strip that was making and then you get into the whole step, and then that's really signal wise what's going on in the whole of fractal solitons anyway.
I mean, the thing about the Mobius strip, it's the simplest structure where you can have momentary current flow, but there's no electromagnetic emission at a distance, because it because it goes around twice, it cancels itself out. And it's 180 degrees out of phase.
It cancels. Yeah, it's so something's going on.
You get a scalar pulse essentially. So it's like the simplest, but it's based on a pulse basis rather than a continuous basis. So you mentioned Tom Bearden earlier, and I have to, for those that didn't see it, draw people's attention to Jean Manning's second, I think it was, Substack post that she made on her Substack blog, Either Or. And she was talking about a conference that she attended where she is standing next to John Hutchison and Yin Gazda. And then down the right-hand side, they're looking out, but on the left-hand side of the photo, you've got Tom Bearden. And then down in the kind of front row, you have Hal Puthoff. And there's Tawari in there. But you've got the actor from Dumb and Dumber, who they happen to be doing something at the same conference venue. They were actually using it for part of the movie, and they came out. So Jim Carrey. So it's quite a special photo. But she mentioned someone I'd never heard mentioned before. And when Jean mentions someone, you listen. And she mentioned this guy called Harold Aspen. Harold Aspen. I don't know if you know the name. I'm probably saying it wrong. Aspen.
I was going to look him up because I didn't recognize.
Yeah, well, I did look him up because, like, she's pointing these names out, and that's the one I don't recognize. And so I did, and you can go to a website. I'll include the link after the call is over. But it has all of his books on his website. I don't even know whether he's alive. I should probably check that before I started talking about him. But he wrote this book whilst I was conceived but not yet born. In March 1972, it was published. So I was born in September 1972. And it's called Modern Ether Science. And he was Doctor of Philosophy at Trinity College in the University of Cambridge. And chapter 2 in Modern Ether Science is, in fact, the flight of thunderbolts. And he goes on in a much later chapter. I'll see if I can find it. I'm just zooming through a combined book that I made of the various sections. It talks about a Wheeler. I'm not sure it's the John Archibald Wheeler. I think it's another Wheeler. But it's very well written, very easy to grasp. I recommend it also. We've moved on from where this discussion is, but there's things that I've learned, and I've just skim read a couple of the chapters of the book. And so I would definitely recommend it. See if I can find it. I mean, he's talking about here about Whittaker's mass, space, and time. He basically says that Einstein's theory is just not self-consistent, and it just messes everything up. And and he makes a good argument, one of the best arguments I've seen for that. Whereas a lot of people just say it because they're anti-Einstein and don't know why. He actually makes a very cogent argument. So it's well worth reading if you want to be able to sound like you know what you're talking about in that respect. Give me just a second. Paul, did you want to say something whilst I'm trying to find this particular quote?
Yeah, sure. Just another synchronicity thing. So Gene put out that blog, and I was going back because our last Hutchinson replication attempt there, I went back to this old electric spacecraft journal that I have. And it's the one where all the Hutchison, he describes what he was doing in there and how his coils were. So I thought, okay, let's start putting together exactly how John described him in that article. Well, in that same electric spacecraft journal is an article on that conference. And so when Gene uploaded that photo where Jim Carrey's like photobombing it, in the spacecraft journal there, it has an image of all the different people, at least most of the names that were there at the conference.
Yeah.
So I upload that onto the Substack and comment on that because it's a whole list of everybody, almost everybody that's standing there.
Wow. Okay. So I think probably because the people that know brought those people because they were the people most relevant at the time. We need to dig into the views and thoughts of those people. I actually sent the link to John, and he was very pleased. And he went on about, in fact, maybe I'll read the email. But essentially, John won an award at that actual conference for his inventions.
Nice.
He sent me a photo of the brass plate that was attached to it. Let me just see if I can get that. Essentially, what I was going on about was that in this modern ether science, and I haven't found it, but maybe I can search for the word Wheeler and it'll get to the part. There we go. Well, here we go. I found Wheeler again, and it says, then referring to Wheeler and Feynman. That definitely is John Archibald Wheeler. So it may seem to the reader that to speak of vortex theories of a fluid ether is to set the clock back a century. It is out of tune with the world of modern physics. Out of tune with the world of the modern physicist. Yet the eventual truths about the ether will not change with time, and the truths of the past will not either. The physicists of the last century may not have had experimental data we possess today, but equally, they could focus their undistracted attention on the fundamental philosophical implications of the subject. Their conclusions may not be conclusive, but their lines of inquiry deserve respect and should not be rejected without some caution. After all, they did possess some experimental facts which the modern physicist still cannot explain. It is gratifying to see a report of a lecture in June 1971 in New Scientist and Science Journal, page 242, which I've been unable to find, unfortunately, at the Cambridge Institute of Theoretical Astronomy. And this is, I think, what he's saying here. His new discipline describes reality without recourse to either mass or charge. Whereas Einstein described a universe where the curvature of space-time was a product of real masses for which Einstein could not account theoretically, Wheeler's universe accounts for all phenomena without the need to postulate any real mass at all. This is a revolutionary improvement on Einstein. Its full implications are only beginning to be realized. In superspace, Wheeler contends pre-geometry constructs material out of non-material. This plenteous nothing, not to be confused with antiquated theories of ether, contains entities of dimensions far too small for the direct observation. However, on the scale of the order of 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, the Planck's distance, the universe is a fabulously rich sea of events, eddies, vortices, and foam. So basically, he's saying that probably it's constructed by vortices out of something fundamental. And I would agree.
Yeah.
So, as I say, nothing in this life is original. Nothing. Like, I don't have any objections to what I said there at all. So I'd recommend people have a look at this, and thank you for that. Let me see if I can pull up what John said, because he got quite excited about it.
And Harold Aspen's work there is quite good too. And
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I started looking into it, and he's got some great papers. So,
yeah, absolutely,
yeah, definitely a strong thinker here. So I actually need to ask Jean why she specifically pulled him out of the bunch. Maybe she spent some time hanging out with him, but it seemed like the way she was saying it is she had great respect for him, or that other people that she knew who were the leaders in the field had great respect for him and wanted him at the conference, and she was pleased to meet him, given what other people had said before she got to meet him. So I think it's really, really important we get her perspective on what that is. So John saying, I got a video of this Tom Bearden. So John says he's got a video of this event with Tom Bearden, Hal, and others. It was epic. I met Kirk R. Thatcher from Star Trek. Yin and I stayed at his house. Yin and I by invitation. Also, I was there. I was in interviews there twice. I have had videos it was hosted by Dennis Weaver. I won an award. Also, Yin filmed Tom Bearden and Hal Puthoff. Hal stayed with me in New Westminster. I demonstrated my free energy unit. It was a great time. The good old days. I met Dennis Weaver against blah, 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 and Dr. Rauscher. And apparently Dr. Rauscher is the origin for the frequencies that are in your Therify. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah.
That's what I've been told.
Well, Dan, Dan had published them in that book, but yeah, at one point before she passed away, Elizabeth actually called me and said, "Oh, you're using my frequencies," and
really?
Yeah.
Did he give you any hint as to where you can find the origin story for that?
I don't know. It might be in. She probably wrote about it in the orbiting, the moon's orbiting Pluto or something like that. One of her books, but
right.
I'm not sure. Yeah,
definitely. I think Dr. Rauscher is someone we all need to pay a little bit more attention to what she was saying.
Yeah.
Certainly, John could have almost no one with more respect than Dr. Rauscher. So I don't have a headspace of what her expertise was and why she was held in such high regard. Obviously, she was a woman in a highly male-dominated field. That in itself is incredible.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
Right. So, does anyone else want to dip in before I read something from Dr. Matsumoto, which always, this journey rebuilding his book is incredible because I'm starting to understand how he's thinking, and the genius is just layered on genius, and his being at the forefront of anything. It must have been quite intimidating for people that were in the fusion field to have these statements coming out. So does anyone have, Astros, do you want to ask a question?
Before Alex ducks away, I was hoping he would continue what he was starting to say about his car modification in the 80s.
Oh, go for it, Alex.
Oh, yeah. I was just trying, I was a hot rodder and nerd, and I was trying to get more power and efficiency, because you do the math stoichiometrically, you should get a lot more. So I thought, you'd heard about the fuel vapor systems, and I just wrapped a copper coil around the exhaust header. The header was steel with aluminum anodized, which maybe that had something to do with it or not, I don't know. But this will sound crazy, but I just pumped gasoline into the copper coil and then had a nozzle over the manifold. So the gas flashed right to steam, the gaseous form of gasoline coming out of the nozzle. And then at various times we fooled with water injection too, using the same system, because you got the heat right there and you can fill it with water. And then it comes out as steam, or, real hot, dry steam, boom. And I knew from the planes in World War II, the Mustangs used to, and that was a Mustang car, a little synchronicity, but they used to use water injection. Spitfires did too, to be fair, I guess, for power and presumably efficiency. And there's no doubt in my mind that we had all kinds of Leonard crap going on when you did that, just with the vortexes and the heat, and the multi-actor shear.
Yeah, I actually saw was it a patent? I think a recent patent someone mentioned where the person was just mixing 10% diesel with water and they're basically creating a water fuel emulsification and then using that as fuel.
Well, I mean, the old moonshiners, this is a fact, and I'm a moonshiner, as it were. I had it still, I've told you about that, but I used to you could run your car off ethanol, and coming out, what comes out of the still, there's water in there already.
Yeah, I think it's about 50%, isn't it?
Well, I don't
think you can go much higher, can you?
The first stuff that comes out, they call the head. With the still? Yeah. Oh, you can't get 100, but you can get pretty high. Right, and the first stuff that comes out is the more volatile crap. But anyway, okay. The point of it is, ethanol will form, and the other alcohols form a solution with the water, unlike gasoline, which separates, right? So you can pour that shit straight into your tank, and it runs great, which drives me nuts, because they all talk about how alcohol ruins your car and ethanol. No, it's the opposite. Again, it's best. You'd rather just run moonshine. I mean, it's not quite as power dense as gas. Methanol, and that's why funny cars run, nitromethane and all that stuff. Yeah. But yeah, you can mix it with water. They mix it with water there, so it happens. And I think there's probably a little bit of Leonard going on there too. Why wouldn't there be, if you've got multi-axis shear and the temperature's going on?
Oh, okay, so I'm glad you mentioned that. This brings me back to so this guy Tibby has been doing these experiments, and he got all a bit disappointed when he found out that a planing tool that you might use or a grinder actually in one paper produce these iron spheres. And then he found out near his grinder he would find these spheres. And I said, well, I don't see any reason why not. And I said, have you heard about the Usherenko effect? And and he said no. And well, essentially, the Usherenko effect is you create a shaped charge, and instead of having the copper in there, you put in sand grains, and a proportion of these sand grains will embed themselves and travel into up to 30 centimeters into steel. And they leave a vitrified column with transmuted metals in there. Now, typically they've used steel, but there was a replication done on this, and these references I'll try and put into the chat, into the blog later. There was a replication done that I found whilst I was just explaining this argument to him, where they actually used aluminium, and they specifically chose silicon carbide grains, like grinding actual grains that you would have in a silicon carbide grinding wheel, and in an Usherenko effect event, and they found iron and I think zinc and even anyway, let's just say iron and zinc, and they did the equations: aluminium plus aluminium equals iron, and silicon, and so on. Like, okay, so it's synthesizing iron, because in the original Usherenko effect you've got iron in there because it's steel. And of course this comes down to the thing that, like, silicon and aluminium, but aluminium in particular, are perfect fuels in Lena, because, for instance, you have in the ferrosilicon foundry, they were synthesizing 4 tons of extra metal a day, and the carbon oxygen must be fusing to silicon and synthesizing extra silicon, which they were getting 3 extra tons, and some of the silicon must have been going on to fuse together to make iron with these balance equations that you can do. And so that is extraordinary in its own right. And also, we have to remember that in Kladov's 1993 patent for his cavitator, it was when he had aluminosilicate 5% suspension in his reactor, his COP went to 11.7, and he put from a 70 kilowatts in, he's getting nearly a megawatt out. So he's getting 762 kilowatts of excess heat, right? But only when he puts aluminosilicate suspension in there, right? So definitely, aluminium for me is the Wunder fuel in Lena. And so there's one issue that this raises with my Cosmic Summit presentation that I found in the what I call the Sword in the Stone sample from John Hutchison. This paper would explain how I could get the iron-rich crenellated in sphere in there, potentially from synthesis from the aluminium when it goes through the planing process, right?
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't explain the yin-yang structures and the other synthesized elements in the fraction of the boundary. But then I put my thinking cap on, and I thought, well, what about how should we put this? What about when we're looking at a grinding wheel? Well, if you've got these sand grains in Usherenko effect, they're traveling typically a muzzle velocity, let's say, of 1 kilometer per second or whatever it is, 1 kilometer per second. And it turns out that they have a kinetic energy of 10 kiloelectron volts, right? 10 kiloelectron volts is over the 5 kiloelectron volts that Shishkin et al. Has established is what's necessary to produce an energy soliton. Okay, and once the energy soliton is produced and it detonates, they can produce 10 to the 11 energy electrons up to 10 kiloelectron volts, which is far in excess of the necessity that you need to produce an energy soliton ad infinitum. So you get a method. So this is Shishkin's idea of how the process is occurring. But I thought, let's if 10 kiloelectron volts of the initial impact is what's necessary, sorry, 10 EV is what seems to work to start the process. What is the energy in a grain of a cutting wheel? Well, the difference between a grain in a cutting wheel and a particle coming in an Usherenko effect, or the experiment where they fired, for instance, a bullet into a bismuth bullet into a thing, and they produced transmutation. That experiment that's been done in Russia, which we attempted a replication, David, but yeah, it is that let's say the silicon carbide grain is actually embedded in a matrix. And its kinetic energy isn't the kinetic energy of the silicon carbide grain. It's potentially the kinetic energy of the entire flywheel in which it's embedded, right? So it turns out that in a standard 10 centimeter small grinding wheel, the kinetic energy, angular velocity driven, for a typical, not even that very fast one, is 9.36 times 10 to the 20 EV.
That'll do it.
10 to the 20 EV. So if there's only one silicon carbide grain hitting your metal, then it potentially has the ability to deliver all the kinetic energy it needs to start the process. So it's not surprising sparks flying off. And here's the bizarre thing. Everyone says, well, that's just like a spark from a grinding wheel. It's such a prosaic explanation. There's nothing special going on there. And it's like, have we been missing all of this time that Lena is actually occurring in something as ridiculously simple as a grinding wheel?
No, it's going everywhere. That's Lena is how the universe works. I mean,
but of course, this is rock smashing together, isn't it? You know, a rock falling down a mountain might actually be making new elements on its way down.
And it's in every electric discharge from cathode and electrode, and it's in every laser cutting. You see the sparks flying from laser cutters. They're all the same thing.
Because he shared this video where he had two pieces of braided copper wire, and he pushes it together, and there's sparks which look like they're kinetic velocities. And there are other ones that someone identified that sort of go over here, bend round and curve up and go over there. And I didn't share it because like I had too much on at the time. And this was a couple of years back. I think it was in 2019 or 2020. I processed it, but I never got it out the door. And I actually don't know where it is right now. But it was a Marsa gas, and they did some testing after I left because they were a bit blown away by the different perspective they'd seen. And so they did some more testing, and they shared some videos with me, and I went through them frame by frame, and I saw exactly the same thing going on. These things going around and moving where they wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the tibia experiment, when you get some slow motion shots of that, I'd be really curious to see, because they're all just flying around and zipping around. You'll see the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, you brought up shaped charges, and I got to tell you, when I was learning about shaped charges at the academy, like apropos of shaped charges for destruction, for armor piercing,
is there any other kind?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess mining maybe, I don't know, but I couldn't stop. Like, I knew there was something else going on there, and I still think that's an interesting vein to mine and look at and think about and fold it into what's going on. Something about the shape. I think, honest to God, like that grill that I showed you, that Komodo grill, I've been overdriving it and getting weird looking effects. I'm not gonna bring them up because I haven't determined enough yet. But I mean, I think I might have even transmuted something in there, and like the iron in it is all beat up and brittle, like not from temperature that I would think, because it's a grill. I mean, I've worked with grills. I'm a chef all my life. Getting a grill hot doesn't do this.
Yeah.
And then I was pulling out these hunks of what looks like calcium carbide. I don't know, but I was just fooling around, kind of like Hutchison did with his transmitters. I thought like the shape of the egg. I took out a lot of the stuff in there and made sure it was smooth, and I'm like, and tried to put a blower on the bottom to maybe amplify the vortex, because just poking around thinking maybe this could be a wind hex. And I'm seeing weird stuff, or what looks weird to me. I'm not saying it's anything yet, but we keep finding this stuff right in front of our eyes.
I know.
I mean, read Kerbrand's book.
Right? Yeah. I've not read it, but like, I've seen some.
The whole stuff about welding and
right.
Yeah, that's another one I wanted to just go back and read and sit and go, yeah, there's something going on here.
I'm getting a lot more out of these older people's work every time I do it. Even Ken Shoulder's work, every time I read it, I suddenly realize what he was getting at when he was saying something. Like, if people think they understand what we've been talking about these last few years, go and revisit some of those key texts, because you're going to start, you with where you are now, you're going to be able to go, I
think you tune to it, you know.
Yeah.
It's like an alchemical text, and or like the lithograph, the paleolithographic stuff that you should.
Yeah.
It's trigger stuff. I mean, and it's interesting because you see different things than I do in certain different ones. Like, it's funny, I live in New Orleans, the fleur-de-lis everywhere, right?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
But yeah, there's it's ubiquitous. This is what's really
just
going on
everywhere.
This is it. The other thing I want to bring up, Dr. Cruz, Jack Cruz, he's all into the biophotons and sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
Legit, it's true.
I don't know whether it was you put me onto him a couple of weeks back, but it seems fairly logical. I mean, I would argue the biophotons are these, and in fact that's a beautiful segue to this clip that I will out of Matsumoto's book. It's absolutely perfect segue.
I just want to say I think he's missing the secret sauce of the solitons.
Oh, I think it is. That's exactly it.
Because he talks about grounding and stuff like that, and I'm like, yeah, it's not just, we're not just talking about charge. Mm-hmm. We're talking about chi.
Yes.
But he's a hard scientist, so
the sort of stuff that Ninel Kuligina can throw around, but she couldn't do anything when there was a thunderstorm.
Right. But like the other thing, you had that great Ode with the ESP talking about the wrinkles in the brain.
Yeah,
that's like what you and Hank did.
Yeah,
the EVOs like to live in the wrinkles. Well, where are our chakras?
Yeah,
there's wrinkly parts there: brain, thyroid, lungs.
Yeah,
I think there's something to it, and I've even been just trying to observe that, and as I do this. I get more ideas on the letter, and I can just start to grok it. I'm not saying I'm right, but like I know that if I just start tinkering away on this Wintex, I'll start to it'll come.
Yeah,
I mean, we'll figure something out. We're gonna get here. There's no.
We definitely. It's definitely happening. Yeah, it's definitely happening.
I mean, this stuff has already been done. It's been done.
Well, the large industrial grinding wheel. The calculation comes out at 10 to the 23 electron volts. Yeah. That is the kinetic energy that could potentially be imparted to one silicon carbide grain, which we already know from an Usherenko effect will burrow itself into aluminium from this replication. Now, the interesting thing is this group, they argue that it causes they argue that it causes extra electrons to be dissociated from the metal lattice, forming a process by which they change the properties of the metal in front of them in order but their actual argument is not out of the realms of how it would work with an exotic vacuum object. They're saying that effectively there's a whole bunch of extra electrons coming from somewhere, and they allow the process to proceed. It's just they're not consistent in the logic with anything else. They're just self-contained.
It took me a while to get there. The whole, but the EVO, once you get into the knowing that there's something like this, and then what is ether, but maybe a plenum of really tiny EVOs that act. I don't want to.
Yeah. So this is from 3.10 in Steps to Discovery Electronuclear Collapse. And it is on for those people that have access to the book. Let me just see. It might be in the first part. Let me just see if it's in the first part here. Oh, there's this part. Maybe it's this part. Is it in the mechanisms of cold fusion or the mechanisms of 3? Anyway, I've got it. I've got the clip taken out here. It's 310, and he calls it radiations. He says 2 kinds of radiations were observed during underwater spark discharge experiments 8: energetic X-rays and unknown radiations. Energetic X-rays were observed by the cadmium telluride detector under continuous DC mode. The X-rays were associated with the appearance of tiny sparks on the electrode surface, and the intensity increased as the number of sparks increased. The energy spectrum of the X-rays was continuous and decreased monotonically as the energy increased up to about 130 kiloelectron volts. So, what does he mean? When he says the energy spectrum of the X-rays was continuous, that means no characteristic X-rays. None. It just goes from here and it goes down and it just decreases monotonically. Okay. As the energy increased. Now, he saw it up to about 130 kiloelectron volts. This was seen before the end of 1989 by Takaaki Matsumoto. This is J radiation that was observed by Barkla in the 1910s and mentioned in his 1920 Nobel laureate acceptance speech as his point of focus, and in fact it was his point of focus until he died. And this is what Shishkin says is exotic vacuum objects. This is what I think is likely to explain the signal that we saw in GS 5.2 in early 2016. Because we saw no characteristic X-rays. Now, we did see it going up much, much higher, but in the case of Matsumoto, his experiments were 12 to 15 days. Ours occurred over a couple of hours where this peak was seen, and outside of signal 7, signal 8 and 10, you saw other energy, but it was within this range that he observed. So if you were to average out over a 12-day period, a number of pulses, most of the energy would be in the range that he observed. So maybe he could have observed higher, but it's only a small fraction of the, or his system didn't produce very large clusters. So I've said it for many years, I think it was a large exotic vacuum object that blew up and dissipated its energy in a range of either electron or electron photon or photon energies inside the scintillator. And so he then goes on to say the X-ray spectra were shown in Figure 6, Reference 8. Such energetic X-rays could not be emitted from conventional orbital electrons at all. That's exactly what Barkla said in his Nobel lecture. However, they could be emitted by the breakup of itonic electron linkages. He's saying that the thing that is microball lightning, and he agrees that whatever microball lightning is what an exotic vacuum object is in his note to the editor in 2001 of Fusion Technology. He's saying that when they break up, they are the thing that are emitting the electrons that are at this energy. Linkage, those traces were very often observed on the copper plates. On the other hand, unknown radiations, now this just gets freaking amazing for me. On the other hand, unknown radiations were observed during continuous underwater spark discharge. They were emitted from near the cadmium cathode on those surfaces where the tiny sparks were shining. Here, a special device, Eagle's wheel, was used to detect the unknown radiation. So for anyone who doesn't know, Dr. George Eagley, who I have a good relationship with, and he's travelled with me. He came with me to India to test out the Echo device. He came with me to Japan to test the Amasa gas. It is a little device, and he actually describes it in the next text, so I'll just read what he says. Here, a special device, Eagle's wheel, was used to detect the unknown radiation. The wheel could respond to unknown biological radiations from the hands of a human being when he or she were vital. The wheel indicated a high value for the radiation. When the wheel was located close to the cathode, it indicated a very high value. The cathode is where the exotic vacuum object will be emitted from. The radiation from underwater spark discharge should be the same as that of being emitted from the hands of a human being. The detailed assignment of the unknown radiation has not been made yet. This is in a review article that was published and then republished again in 2000 and 2001. It was published a little bit before that. It wasn't until 2010 that we heard Ken Shoulders saying exotic vacuum objects can come out of your fingers in his interview with John Hutchison. That him actually verbalized that. So he is saying literally here, right then, that effectively the chi that comes out of your fingers, that Ninel Caligina would have been able to produce a neutral thing that would penetrate through a perspex container to move non-metallic objects inside, that would bend to a will that she couldn't do when a thunderstorm was sucking up all that chi, right? But she could do it when there was no thunderstorm. That energy is the same energy. And if that is the case, this would be the same kind of energy that came out of the 1950s boiling water reactors that were done in classified program using palladium and deuterium in Russia, which was able to remediate or change the half-lives of radioisotopes, which means they're neutrino-like radiation. It's all coming together really rather nicely. And, you know, I hope Matsumoto gets full credit for his maverick, blazing trail of light that he tried to share with the world. And just, well, they weren't ready. They just weren't ready. He goes, furthermore, a strange phenomena was observed with the electronuclear ENT cluster. There was an inner zone around the transmuted material only on the copper plates which were inserted into the solution. This fact suggested that the itonic clusters should have had the capability of making material surfaces somewhat inert. I've just pulled that other random quote out because in a video that you can see of me looking at a iron, which is a iron, how should we put this? Mild steel, so ferromagnetic steel plate in Henk Urian's Vega experiment. He drilled some holes in it, and you can see on the video the discharges spinning around those holes and going into the holes. But it had been several months, and the rest of the plate had got rusty, but around those holes it hadn't gone rusty at all. Now, I think what's going on is that is synthesizing and depositing potentially silicon and or aluminium as a very thin layer on there, and it's effectively coating it with an inert material. And this might have been something that, you know, where you have these columns in India where it's never rusted. Is that the same kind of thing going on? Or is it like Osawa iron, where in the case of Osawa iron, George Osawa iron, the iron had much different properties, and I think one of the properties was much less prone to rusting. I don't know, but they're just two little clips, but I think the clips on radiation are utterly profound. They link in with everything that we've learned, and they've been in the historical record, and no one's paid attention to them. Okay, does anyone have any questions on that, or any other questions on anything? No?
I know Mickey has some stuff to say, so maybe I can put him on the hot spot.
Okay.
Hot seat. Mickey, unmute.
Mickey? Are you there? No, we're not hearing from him. Oh, go on.
He'll come in. In the meantime, do you have any things you'd like to talk about, Bob? I remember we said we would once talk in the public discourse about the Marray valve. Don't know if this is the right call for it.
Yeah. I don't want to hold things back longer than I have to. Not that I have to. I think the Marray valve is collecting charge clusters from the environment. It's not just because he puts an antenna up and it's an electrostatic potential difference because of the height, which is a known thing in the atmosphere. He's checked, and he went into the desert to develop this. And he's collecting the charge clusters, and he's blowing them up.
Yeah, charge clusters definitely have to be part of the recipe. Yeah, and I noticed Ken Pratt mentions the Swedish stone. That's the other mystery.
The Swedish stone was part of an early PN junction, or rather, it was more like a Schottky diode, something like more like a hairpin diode. And it allowed the electricity, in my view, to go one way and not come back. So, you could keep the flow going in a particular direction. The Swedish stone might also have been a radioactive material. And as soon as you get radioactive material in there, you're going to be creating charge clusters itself. But I don't think in this case it was the main focus. I think the main focus was to have a high energy pulse system, which was solid state and not needing to be driven to produce those impacts that are over the necessary level to break up the charge clusters he was bringing in from the environment. So if you can imagine, in the environment, when you're not on a stormy day, right? Because Ninel Caligina couldn't do a magic on a stormy day, right? So it sucks all the charge out of the air, okay? If you are collecting those on your antenna, and that's coming down because we know from thank you very much, Muggle. We know. I'll talk about Thor in a sec. We know that a lightning conductor can pull the charge down towards the ground. It comes down the wire, and we know from the work of Matsumoto, which he describes as a new kind of electrical current, that the itonic clusters, the ball lightning, and his name is itonic clusters, the ball lightning can travel along a wire, but it's not causing resistance. It's like cold electricity, and it is what cold electricity is. It travels along and it spreads through the wire. Then it comes into your device, and then you hit that with a radioactive material, and it blows the clusters up. And so essentially, you don't need to have electronics when you have a radioactive material in order to blow clusters up. And then you get a load of free electrons. And if we're to believe Shishkin and Korols and Dubovik, it's 10 to the power 11. 10 to the power 11 per energy soliton. That's a lot.
I really like the sound of that. I agree that, again, with everything we've learned about charge clusters, so many of these effects seem to make more sense. But there's one thing I discussed with John Marray, Thomas's son, before he passed away, and he really wasn't ever sure how it worked, to be quite blunt. But we came up with a theory.
Henry Marray knew.
Yeah. I agree, and it's something we've had to discover along the way, and then there's not a lot of verbiage to describe these things until now. But one thing that we came up with was the idea that, well, once upon a time, Tesla supposedly shielded radioactive materials sufficiently to reduce their radioactivity, implying that their instability was, made worse by whatever energy was being dissipated to it from the environment. The idea that you could shield a radioactive material and make it less radioactive, it led to some other thinking. Later, I thought, what if the rate at which the radioactive decay is occurring is tuned to the rate at which the background energy is fluctuating? Perhaps that was tuning the circuit to particular frequencies that made it more attractive to some of these, ambient charges, including charge clusters. And John liked the idea, but we ran into some roadblocks with basically he wanted to manufacture these Swedish stones. They needed to be radioactive, but we did find a loophole in the end. You can actually work with radioactive materials if you don't refine them. So as long as we use like natural ores and didn't like grind them or pulverize them or do anything to concentrate the radioactivity, we were allowed to do experiments with them. But that was as far as we got. And that's a working theory for maybe what the nature of the circuit tuning with radioactivity may do to enhance the ability to harvest charge clusters.
Well,
that's my
the guy that in the 1950s claimed, and I can't remember his name. It's the Russian name. It escapes me, but it's in my video for the launch of the translation of Space Earth Human, and he also got put away for complaining about Krypton 85. If that's any waypoints. And by the way, Krypton 85, and I've mentioned this many times, is I think 0.3% of the fission product of uranium, and it goes into the atmosphere and it causes it causes ionization in the atmosphere, and that produces more lightning. So I rest my case. more charge in the air caused by a radioactive gas decaying, and so it's the way you detect plutonium production. Is the rate of lightning strikes.
So wait, you're saying that, just to be clear, you're saying the radiation is blowing up charge clusters, which is charged in the clouds to make lightning?
So the traditional explanation is Krypton 85. I think it's 0.3% of the fission product of uranium goes into the environment, and it causes ionization in the air. But I can look now what the energy of Krypton 85 is. What is the decay energy of 85 Kr? The energy decay of krypton is associated. I know what a decay is. 687 kilo electron volts, right? So, traditionally thinking that produces ionization in the air, so you get static charge buildup. What is static charge? It's exotic vacuum objects. It's charge clusters.
Shear,
yeah. And that's in the air, and that then causes more lightning. Now we have to think that is it actually breaking water molecules up in the air? The water molecules having been broken up, produce hydrogen that then gets impacted by over 5 electron volts, of which I pretty much am certain 687 kilo electron volts is over 5 electron volts any day of the week. That is producing energy soliton, which then gets a hit gain by another impact, and that releases 10 to the 11 electrons. We're literally getting to the point of how nature creates these fantastic storms. Not just a little bit of friction. In fact, friction might actually be doing the same process. Like, where does the electrons actually come? Because when I'm taught at school and we got friction producing electricity, I'm thinking, what, are they just rubbing the electrons off? Is like one thing grabbing an electron and collecting it? No, it comes back to that grinding wheel. If you've got a thing that's moving along something and it's a irresistible force met with an immovable object, well, the object doesn't move, but maybe some of the atoms on it get smashed up, releasing energy solitons that then get broken up again. And we get this fantastic amount of static charge built up. And so we might have to revisit how static actually is created, even by freaking rubbing a dry cloth on a bit of perspex. It's the kinetic energy of the cloth fibers, maybe. What is friction? If you actually look at a diagram of what causes friction, someone will draw a picture of some scraggy atomic cross-section and another scraggy atomic cross-section, and they're rubbing against each other. So, to me, that looks more and more like a grinding wheel the closer you get to it. Or at least a plane. Right? Are you there, Paul? Are you with me?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that was the clincher in the Tibby experiment for me, is having the water between the plates. That's what it's taking the hydrogen, and that's
well,
what's doing
so
it,
we
the hydrogen.
established. My hunch was okay. It's known that aluminium can be used to produce hydrogen. So I just wanted to prove that for the community, that it happened in the Ultra experiment. We proved that absolutely conclusively. We also proved that in that same experiment, it transmuted material in a hexagon structure that had a ring soliton structure in the center with spatial arrangements of transmutation. It's done. It's done. It's done. When someone mentioned to me, in fact, it was Tony Gibboni, when we had the first meeting in Holland. He said, have you heard about this thing that we use all the time in our manufacturing our parts for the custom car builds that we do, called wire electrode discharge machining? I said, yeah, I have. He says, blah, blah, blah. I said, and then I just explained how I would expect it to occur if it was, because no one's ever explained how it would work. And so I went to the company that had the 1 million views, because it was 9 minutes around the corner by walking from where I used to live in the UK for nine years. And I went there, and I've got some beautiful slow motion video, and I took some samples, but I only had enough time at the end of a microscope session to look at one of them. It took me 90 seconds, and there was a yin yang's 2 spheres with the curly bit and carbon on one side, and then all the way down the cutting thing, it was sections of a sphere. What they did tell me is you mustn't make an arc, which is not cutting by an arc. And I had this argument with Grok, and it finally decided that probably it was doing this thing where you had this non-radiating boundary, which was basically making the metal disappear. It's the same process. Yeah. So like we're at a point now where all of these mundane ways of explaining away Lena are actually Lena as well. It's hilarious. And no, so I've got to look at this because it's in this book, and this is, I think, way before the electric universe. So this is the point of me bringing up this guy. Okay, say what you want to say. I'm going to find this bit, Paul.
Yeah, and it's the same with the Brown's gas and why it reacts on certain materials differently. You know, like the tungsten, it's just immediately poof, disassociates and it's gone. But the gallium, like you were saying, and I've seen that with magnesium. I had a guy come by who makes magnesium oxide wall panels, basically, and they're, you know, fireproof, insect proof, all this. And I said, well, let's see how these stand up to the Brown's gas. And took them out to the
good luck with that.
I took one of these panels, and I completely expected that it was just going to blow a hole right through it, like instantly, like it does with most things. But to my surprise, it just started glowing. It was that same effect. It started glowing and glowing, and it wasn't same as the indium, wasn't burning through. And yeah, and it did slowly. It turned to like a white ash, but it really withstood that flame. And I can burn through, you know, steel this thick, or
yeah.
granite and everything like that, no problem. But yeah, that was it. So magnesium's got something to it.
I'm going to read a section here from this 1972 book, Modern Ether Science here. And it goes like this, if I've got the right part. If the thunderball is to become a nuclear phenomena instead of simply turbulence, eddy, or whirlpool in the ether, this is in line with history. We do not know what it is for certain. If we like to believe it to be nuclear, then that is our open choice. It is probably the same with our understanding of the heat source which sustains our lives, the sun. We have not known of nuclear energy for that many years, but we are now assured that the sun is one massive nuclear furnace. We do not quite know why it does not blow up in one large bang. That's a boom for you guys on YouTube. But For want of a better explanation, it keeps us content to imagine that the sun's energy is of nuclear origin. At the risk of appearing cynical, dare it be suggested that perhaps it is a very large thunderball? This is a guy who's looked at the evidence over a few years since the hydrogen bomb was found, and he's concluded that why isn't anyone actually considering that the sun is like a ball lightning? 1972. Or rather, a very large ball of the kind we associate with the thunder and lightning phenomenon. One might wonder if the men of ancient times ever perceived these thunderballs as miniature suns. After noticing that their buoyancy in space and witnessing them dipping into the water and dispersing energy, the old mythology asserted that after the sun had dipped into the Western Ocean, that the sunset, blah, 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 blah. It's talking about how it goes around the Earth. The object of these early ideas was to explain not the nature but the apparent motion of the sun. Nevertheless, it was conceived as a ball of fire, the origins of which were beyond speculation. It is of interest to wonder how the physicist contrived to explain the source of the sun's heat before the advent of the nuclear theory. One viewpoint attributed to Sir William Herschel in the book published in 1852 is expressed in the words in order blah blah blah, and it's just total nonsense what he writes, but it sounds plausible, right? Sounds plausible. The fact that the center of the sunspots expose lower regions within the sun, and by the physics we accept, these inner regions are darker and therefore at lower temperature than the outer regions. Herschel's sun argument is that the energy source is the shell enveloping the sun. Can have some truth in it. Oh, right. So, yeah, he's saying that actually it's the outer part of the sun that's actually creating the heat. It's furthermore, there are some voices left to argue that the sun's energy is not direct nuclear radiation. For many years, a scientist named Bruce has been urging a theory that the solar radiation comes from continuous lightning discharges at the surface of the sun. Sir Basil Schonland mentioned this in his last words of his book. He writes, "Many hot stars, including our own sun, emit radio waves of high frequency which penetrate our ionosphere. Their sources are hot plasmas in the stellar magnetic field and hardly qualifying for the descriptions as thunderstorms. But whether any of the dying stars have relatively cold atmospheres in which thunderstorms could be created is an interesting speculation. Bruce has developed ingenious theories to explain." Anyway, so essentially, what this part of the book is discussing is what we would call today the electric sun model. Not mentioning it like that, it's mentioning whatever the ball lightning is probably actually what the sun is. It isn't some big nuclear bomb. And if that's the case...
Should I say boom?
yeah, I think you should say a boom. I've been speculating this for a good number of years that it would just be hilarious if the actual way the sun works turns out to be cold fusion. And now, it's not an original idea. So there we go.
Well, the neutrino count's all off if it was supposed to be, fusion. It's obviously, and also it's cooler on the inside, and it's got anode tufting, so it's a tube. Well, I forget the name of the engineer from the EU, but he did a whole paper and presentation about the sun having transistor action, as I recall. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind.
I think we can basically conclude that the hot part of the sun is on the surface. It might all be the same temperature inside, but because if you've got something that's constantly at the same temperature outside, eventually the whole body of the interior is going to be that. But if the surface is 6,000 degrees, then probably the whole sun is 6,000 degrees. And then I don't believe...
Well, or unless it's the ball lightning, and what if there's an event horizon or something?
Well, there is an event horizon, but what I'm saying is, let's call it 6,000 degrees for want of being perfect about this. I have argued that the so-called higher temperature that's in the outside is actually where you get exotic vacuum objects formed the nuclei of the atoms that are being synthesized are completely stripped of their atoms. As they come up in the magnetic flux tubes, some of them come down in coronal rain or travel around the solar atmosphere in magnetic flux tubes, and some of them break up, and when they break up, they have to regain all of the electrons which are coming from the environment, right? And as they come from the environment and the new atom is born, the electrons fall through the electronic shells and they produce high frequency photons which look like you've ionized that atom to a very high level, which would require millions of degrees. But it's not ever been ionized. Several protons went in and several electrons went in. They ended up producing a higher number of neutron level atom, which likely is iron, let's say. And the iron then comes out stripped of most of its electrons, and it grabs electrons from space. And it's constantly pulling electrons in because it's positive. It's positive because you're always going to get some protons left over, and the neutrons are some electrons that it's can grab some of those protons, added an electron and an antineutrino, and made a neutron. And so it's always wanting more electrons to keep going.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm not sure where I read this, but apparently it's hotter from the surface of the sun as you travel out into space. That's where it gets hotter and
Yeah,
hotter.
that's what I'm
and
saying.
hotter,
The
and
atmosphere
it's
of the sun
something
is in millions of
like
degrees.
kilometers away is where the heat is,
Yeah.
not in the
But it isn't.
Yeah.
It's not actual thermal heat. It's photonic heat. It's the photons to get there as in a black body sense. You would have to raise the temperature of the sun to a certain temperature in order to get those atoms to be ionized away, such that then they can fall back and produce those photons. But I'm saying they're not ionized away. The nuclei are created without their electrons, and they can support more electron shells, and therefore they are pulling fresh electrons in and producing photons at a higher energy, as if it was black body like we would have to do in a lab on Earth. I think the sun model is utterly bonkers now. I think it's utterly bonkers, and the thermonuclear fusion reactors. I think we're actually possibly learning that aluminium is a big fuel in the Castle Bravo bomb, in which case even bomb theory is wrong.
Oh, bomb theory is, there's all kinds of shenanigans going on there. Yeah, have you heard about the gadget where they might even be triggering them with Leonard and not the whole plutonium pi or uranium or pi slice or plutonium implosion? Subsequently, they figured out with Teller or something called the gadget, which sounded to me a lot like Leonard, electronically or electrically. And what's his name? Joseph Farrell goes into it in depth if you want to look at that.
Well, I don't think they need it. They can just create booms in the the atmosphere using electromagnetics. So
that's a big scam, man.
I'm now at the point where there's you could even come up with a conspiracy where a cabal, let's call it cabal because that's a fun word to use, of people that actually know how the sun works or actually know how nuclear works. They would be happy to have governments around the world come together in the name of peace to attempt to create fusion at the cost of, let's say, for an economy in the UK, 1 billion a year, just to keep all of these scientists occupied, knowing it's never going to be working like that. It's literally like a holding pen for people that can actually work out how it works.
They're having them spin plates, like you say.
Yeah, spin plates. I'm kind of like thinking it's like it's an open prison. Actually, I'm moving towards the spinning plates to open prison.
Oh, I'm already. It's worse than that, my friend. It's a lot. It's a lot worse than that. But the difference is, a lot of these guys are all stovepiped, and maybe know how their little thing works, but they don't have the big picture, and we're figuring it out from scratch.
Yeah.
And I think we actually will leapfrog them. A lot of the
because I don't think they're actually talking to each other.
Right. Absolutely.
And they're too proud to look at some stupid people talking on the internet.
Right. And then they act like know-it-alls, and they think they know it all, but they don't. I mean, I saw that in the Navy all the time, where the guy with the top secret clearance thinks he's got everything, and then no. And like, look, if it's a clearance you know about,
yeah.
I mean, they
probably isn't telling you anything useful.
I mean, all the stuff in nuclear power, they classified it was like E equals MC squared. They classify everything so that nobody knows to look for the good stuff.
Yeah,
they classify everything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I certainly want everyone to stay safe. I can understand, and I've said right from the beginning, I think my first words in 2017 were something like, I know you felt you had to do what you had to do, but you know, there's people dying and there's mouths to feed, right? So we don't need to be living in a world of artificial scarcity and fake problems, and be tying up our scientists with fake facts indefinitely. Yeah. Thank you very much, Muggle, for that donation. All right, I'm going to have a quick look if any questions. If anyone wants to chat on Zoom, fire away. I'm just going to see if there's any questions on Zoom, on YouTube.
The thing that Bearden talked about in that article that you posted regarding the difference between 0-point energy and energy from the vacuum is an interesting point.
Yeah, you see, and I am so happy that Gene took the plunge to start writing, because I see someone like Gene as a bit like Dmitry Baranov sharing that Protvinov proton accelerator, the experiment that proved neutrinos.
Yeah.
Like, it'll never happen again. There'll only be one Gene Manning, and who had connections with basically everyone. And we're talking about a good decade or more of the Cold War era, and so she's watched that whole transition out of that, and yeah. So long may she live and prosper, and long may she mark down her beautiful prose.
Absolutely. Someone else to look at, I found Roy Herbert and his discourses on time, and he brought up the term temporal inertia, which has given me a lot to think about, thinking about these things running along those axes, and even hyperdimensional toroids and whatnot, something like that going on. And does the speed of time flowing, is that what's causing reactions to accelerate?
Well, effectively it is moderating time, but like it's doing more
right
organization and deorganization of matter. It's basically a press which can press other stuff which is non-material or stuff that is material into other material, and vice versa. It's an interface between the material and the immaterial. So I think it's more, and like I ask this question of people all the time when I, if they're willing to listen to me for a little bit of time. I say, what is time, and that stumps a lot of people,
Well, according to Herbert, it's a fluid symmetry, and it gives me a lot to think about. Kind of like what Malcolm says about it being the mold we pour matter into.
Well, for me, time is just rate of change, and when it comes down to perceiving time, like, how do you perceive it?
Well, I mean, down here in 3 space or whatever you want to call it, third density, you can look at it like that, but I think it has higher order function behaviors when you go up.
It might do. I'm still on the camp of I don't need any extra dimensions.
Yeah, unfortunately,
I'm
there,
still
man.
on the camp that even if I do need extra dimensions, this is the one I like living in. And so like, but you know, so I say, well, like, here's an apple. I'm going to put it on the table. How would I perceive the passage of time?
Decomposition.
Yes. So, great,
or
excellent,
of electrons.
great. Because some people are just they're waiting for someone else to put up the hand, and if there's only one there, then they just go quiet. Like so you got right there. So, but what is decomposition actually happening? What's going on? What is it? What is decomposition?
Well, chemical reactions.
Yeah. What is chemical reactions?
TikTok.
What is chemical reactions?
Oxidization.
Interactions. Cross-section, you know.
No. What is the fundamental nature of a chemical reaction?
Electrical.
Yes. There we go.
Everything's electrical.
Everything's electrical. So the passage of time is perceived through electronic exchanges. And this is why I say we're in these particular structures. If you have a zone in which there is no ability for the electron to perform electron functions, that is, interact with any other matter, then time can be frozen. And that includes signals along your nervous system. It also includes a single thought in your brain. So this is why I say in these structures, I believe there's a still quiet area where the balance of the ability of electrons to behave like electrons just stops, right? And so you freeze time, completely freeze time. And so the rest of the universe can continue with the rate of change, whichever it is locally, wherever they are, and whatever you consider is driving that. I have my views. But in this particular little part of this particular overall structure, electrons cannot do electron things, which means time and perception of time is completely stopped. Can go on outside, which means you can go forward in time. Of course, that is if someone lets you out.
That might be maybe that's what Toast did when he went into the halls of Amenti.
Maybe. I actually think the pyramid, when it's spun up, part of that structure will allow for you to be frozen in time. And it might be the alcove in the Queen's chamber. I've yet to decide whether it's there or I think the place where you can exist and still participate is above, but potentially that bit where the chi is coming through, but it's off the central flux line, is a very key area.
Who knows though? The pyramid might just be a starter for all that other crap that's underneath it, supposedly.
Yeah. Well, I think Paul, do you want to talk about our plans? We didn't publish the video. I didn't publish the video of our discussion. Do you want to talk about our plans for working out the Griffin-Brock electrode?
Right. So yeah, this idea with the Griffin-Brock electrode, which mine just got made and they're on their way. Thank you, Griffin. So what we're thinking of doing is, if we can see these X-rays from these Coulomb waves, these Tesla waves, radiant energy, and they can pass, through limestone and that kind of relatively different densities, and we'll be able to differentiate between the granite and the limestone and that. So we're thinking of taking a stack of the limestone tiles that Stephen has imported from the
just to clarify, the
Oswan,
owner and constructor of the Summerhill Pyramid Winery, he actually had mined actual Aswan limestone and granite, same as used in the pyramid, and he has a whole load. Now what actually happened was it was suitable for Egypt climate, but not suitable for the freeze-thaw issues you get going on in Kelowna Valley, and in the Okanagan. And so they kind of cracked and broke off when a bit of moisture got in them, and so he actually took them off, and he's got it coated with something else now. That's right, but they're more vitrified tiles. But he has this big pile of this material, which just happens to be our test bed.
Yeah. So I talked to him the other day, and he said, "Oh yeah, I got a whole pallet of that." So the idea is we take those and stack them all together and put a piece of granite in there, maybe a couple hollow chambers, and then beam the radiation through there and see what we see. See if we can see it on the other side on a screen.
And that's it, essentially. So I would actually like to, and I've been told this week that the people behind that SAR study, which I just don't see it. I just don't see it. But I'd like it to be interesting as they're saying it is, but I just don't see it.
There's something to it, I think, because I saw some synthetic aperture radar stuff when I was in the Navy, and some passive Doppler stuff. And when I was reading the description of how they got these images, it sounded like that's what they were doing was mining for the information that would have come up from the other searches.
Well, I mean, my view is what they're showing you. I don't see how they get from what they're showing you, which looks like a voxel. They're taking 2D slices through a voxel, which is a volumetric pixel structure, which they've generated from the sympathetic SAR system. And what they're showing, it just doesn't track very good to what they're saying is in there. Now, I might have a different opinion if they would publish openly with a viewer the actual 3D volumetric voxel map, and then I could rotate it around. And I know from my 3D modeling, Lightwave has these things called voxels, which were predating most other software with them. And in fact, it ended up being one of the premier tools to visualizing CT scans for brains and stuff. There was actually a module you could plug into Lightwave, and you could take slices through brains or whatever. But I've been working with what they called hypervoxels since the 90s in Lightwave, and you could rotate this thing, and as you rotate it around, you could get a mental impression of what the 3D structure is inside. Now, I'm not discounting what they're saying, but I just don't see it from what they share in videos and things. What they're saying is under there. Now, this is part of what motivated me to try and find this other solution. If we come along with a drone and we scan the pyramid and it's exactly what they're showing, but it's in perfect, beautiful resolution, then amazing.
Yeah.
But then I got told by Yin the other day that it turns out, and I have no way of verifying this, but it says you might not be allowed to do it. And I said, why? It says, apparently NASA owns the insides of the pyramids.
Oh.
And I thought,
wow.
What? No, that's just crazy talk. But I've heard crazier things said. But like, if
I just saw a video short that was supposedly under one of the pyramids, and it had all these crazy different granite columns with copper coils around them, like a big bar of copper wrapped like a coil. I'm like, what? I'd never seen that before, and it looked real. I mean, I don't. Maybe it's the AI someone made it.
Listen, I have no idea. Like, but if we can verify this technology, I believe that as Ninel Kiligina is able to move things with a flux of these things, as Matsumoto was able to see a flux coming out of his reactors, moving the Eagly wheel. I think, and this is actually what I would like to do, and what if you're there, Paul, I would like to see if we can get an Eagly wheel and actually point the Griffin Brock electrode at it and see if we can spin it at a distance.
Oh yeah, yeah, I could see that spinning. Yeah,
even one of those little things that you put in the sun as well.
Bob, could you spell Eagly wheel?
EGELY.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way,
apparently,
and actually, a friend of mine, Andrew Johnson, because when Eagly is showing me this thing, I'm thinking, surely it's just the thermal radiation coming off your hand and it's producing convection because of the shape of the fins on there. And actually, my friend Andrew Johnson has done a fairly convincing video showing that what I suspected might be the reason it does it, what it does, is how it works. So you can go and have a look at Andrew Johnson's Check the Evidence channel and see his analysis of the Eagly wheel. And I, whatever.
And so it could be a bit of both.
And that's the thing. We know Nina Killigina did her stuff, right? And I think the intuition of Matsumoto here. I mean, I was just so surprised to see it there when I'm going through every little full stop, and I'm going, "What's this?
Yeah.
Some bio emitted, like the bioenergy that's released from people's hands. That's the same thing that's coming out of cold fusion experiments." He's actually said it there already. Yeah. So I think there is a momentum on these things that can be imparted if the structures get excited. And the Eagly wheel, I think, is actually made out of aluminium. If I'm not, it was certainly one of the ones I saw. So it might be ideal for it, in fact, to excite it. And that would be wonderful, because I think that the Marx generator impulse version, the superconducting version of Eugene Petkletnov, is the extreme end of this, except for probably ones that have been weaponized, right? The fact that it can punch a hole through something at 5 kilometers distance, that's not what we want to do, right? But, it's when the people are doing these qigong and they come along and they can actually feel the impulse coming into them, right? And then they're not making it up. And it feels like an electric discharge. So I think it's all lining up really rather nicely. So and when your tube's going to come?
They should be here next week. Yeah.
I think basically he's been completely swamped. You had a conversation with him, didn't you?
Yeah, I feel sorry. We're going to try to help him out.
Yeah.
But also,
it was bad enough when I did my first video. Then I looked at the electrodes, and then I said you could probably scan buildings with them, and it's like, stop sending me business. I'm not on any commission. I just want to see the guy make some hard-earned cash, because that's freaking genius what he's done.
You can probably do that with one drone, by the way, rather than two. Just put something inside the pyramid or under it.
Oh yeah, no, we discussed that. You can put it in the chambers, but I'm most interested in the Khufu, but so-called. But the Khafre pyramid is the one where there's all this rampant speculation, and in fact they're all coming to Cosmic Summit. That's what I didn't quite finish. So they're going to be at Cosmic Summit this year, the whole team. So I've said my bit. It's out in the public, and I'm going to have to live with it now, as I'm sort of sit in the green room with them. No, I'm going to try and use that because I really understand that volumetric data, and I also understand Gaussian splatting. That is kind of like where you have a bit of data here, and you have a piece of data all the way over here. And in fact, the first person to really do Gaussian splatting was another plugin developer for Lightwave 3D. And I worked out what he had done when he was just doing promotional videos 9 months or something before he released it. And because I explained how his system was working, he then sent me a personal Christmas card and some other things. It was a bit of a game with him. And all of these visualization systems in 3D are based off this technology that this guy developed. So you take a point over here and a point over here, and then you just splat the color out and you blend between the two. So the mind can fill in the gaps of what it might be without actually all of the data in between. And then you do that over a three-dimensional volumetric pixel grid. and you get an idea of what something should be in not just 2D but 3D. Go on, you're going to say, Paul.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is they're actually going to be at the Cosmic Summit there? So
yeah, they're going to be there. So I'm hoping that I can get them in the room and just say, look, you know, I'd really like to believe this. I think we might have this technology, or we might be able to do this technology that will get really high fidelity, unchallengeable data from at least the bits above ground. And as people have highlighted, there are lots of natural fissures that you can go and walk down in under the pyramid. So or in the plateau. So there's no reason why you can't go into those and shoot beams at any old angle you choose. And as you say, Alex, you could then have a drone just picking up where that's shooting the beam through, like that. You know,
and then just put it back together.
Yeah.
You should check out Brian Rommel. I don't know how he says his name, but he's on X, and he's this guy who he's an AI expert, and he went pretty deep on the whole pyramid stuff with the new imagery, and when a lot of people were saying, oh, it's BS, and he went pretty deep explaining it, and surface level it made sense to me, that enough that I'm like, maybe there really is something there. He would also be someone to get with if we ever wanted to make a MFMP like AI, because he's doing like custom trained AIs that are not part of like a giant cloud, but like, you know, you could have for your own application. I'd love to pull him in, and he sounds pretty.
Well, that would be great. I mean, there is quite a bit of AI being done for this. I mean, in terms of the modeling, I would reach out to my friend Andrew Spagin in Kiev in Ukraine, who I worked on the early development of his 3D Crow application, which is used for games and film modeling and visualization. He's got one of the best visualization structures in there, and I you know, I did a hell of a lot of work to define the retopology engine in there for a number of years, and I actually have a crazy number of licenses of the 3D software itself, at least old versions. I've got the current version as well. I don't know why I upgrade it every year anyway, or at least one of my licenses. But you know, he's a brilliant programmer. He's got a fantastic team behind him, and I think he would be the right person to say, look, can you just look at what data set you would need to acquire, and he'd just be able to run off the program really quickly for the visualization of this. So we would have world-class visualization. Go and have a look at Pilgway. It's the programming company, and he's deeply Christian. He has a large family there, and he ethically prices this world-leading modeling software, texturing and modeling software. You can even get almost a free version. Like, he gives you versions, like if you're not going to do commercial stuff, you can get it very cheaply and stuff. It's just brilliant. Really sound guy. Couldn't sing his praises more. Okay. So, Paul, do you have any other questions? Anyone else have any questions? So Ken Pratt is Ken.
I
Pratt.
saw,
Go on.
I saw Ken's about the John Maluski and his growing gold from glass, and
Okay.
I have one of his little. Yeah, I have one of his reactors, and basically what it is it's an alumina cylinder, and then there's ground up graphite around it, so that then an insulating layer, and you put that in the microwave. And what happens is the graphite absorbs the microwave energy and heats up, turns like cherry red. And then whatever you put in there, he was putting glass in there and getting gold beads out of the glass. So Ken was asking if it has something to do with the evos of the letter happening. But I know John said, well, it's in the glass and it's in like monatomic forms and it's conglomerating and coming out. Yeah, it'd be interesting to re-look at that. That was many years ago, but yeah, I should drag that out.
Did you find that it was producing gold?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, and he said what it was these small concentrations of gold that was in the glass. even, you know, broken beer bottles and things like that, and you can put in there and get some out of it. But it'd be really interesting with this new light of understanding that you've brought with the fractal toroidal moment. Is there any of that happening in there? Could very
Well,
well be.
we've already discussed at the early part of this conversation that you get exotic vacuum objects forming when water moves across the surface of glass and or mercury. That was that was where we started this conversation. So all
Yeah.
of the above,
And
yeah.
there, right, and there's water in the glass, so
Well,
it
there
could
we
be
go.
that minute amount of water.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
certainly with the gold price at $3,200 practically. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm looking at my wedding ring now. No, I'm joking. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't have to buy the nugget from Alaska this year. Let's put it that way. Yeah, I have not heard of him, but Paul definitely has the resident alchemist here. So, Paul, I wonder if you'd just like to share with the community here, you know, how your understanding or view on alchemy, you just intimated there, has maybe shifted, and because it's one thing to be an alchemist and to know the ancient processes and stuff. It's a very different thing to actually start to understand that that actually may be a real thing that actually is driving the process. Do you want to just give us a few thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. I think from the traditional alchemy sense, there was all these processes and the idea where you have to incubate your metals in a philosophical egg. Again, here's the perfect egg shape that you would keep at a certain temperature for 9 months in order to um, digest your materials in to come up with the gold. But I understand now after, you know, really understanding what you've been talking about for all these years, how it's possible that these fractal toroidal moments could play a major part in the transmutation of the elements and how they can be generated, like in this idea of the mercury with the glass. That shear effect of the spinning mercury against the glass, you know, causing a little evos that are glowing, and the red that you're seeing is the frequency that's coming from that plasma that's in there. And yeah, it makes sense because there's a lot of alchemical transmutations because mercury's close to turn
Well,
mercury into gold.
mercury was one of the key
And
metals in alchemy, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then there's the philosophical mercury too. So the sulfur, salt, and mercury of alchemy have always been a thing, but they had like philosophical principles, and wasn't necessarily that they're using those elements. But it does overlay. There's like multiple layers. Like it's like reading a news article and you read it through multiple different layers. Alchemy is like that. Any alchemy text, you have to gain that kind of understanding. And then you realize they're saying the deeper layers with the same common words. It's like, yeah, it's all there.
Wasn't there some
Interesting.
almost like level of obfuscation of the knowledge? Like, isn't that something that alchemists did to a
Yeah,
degree?
that's why they called it gibberish. The word gibberish comes from Jabir, and people would read those texts and go, "I don't understand this. It's just gibberish, right? It doesn't make sense." But unless you, with the eye, with those with eyes to see and ears to hear,
There we
right, then you
go.
could say, "Ah, I know."
Mhm. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So now that's what Bob's provided for all of us is the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Really, I thank you, Bob, for putting all this together because it really
Well,
made
it's
me
been
understand a
always
lot
been
of
a
the
collective effort, and
type of,
you know, it's
yeah.
been a pleasure working with you over the last couple of years, and I hope long may that relationship last as well. And also people like Alan Goldwater, they bring so incredible rich perspectives from you know, and even like just everyone has something to offer. They really do.
Yeah.
People constantly underestimate what they can do, actually, and you know, it's when I looked at that Stanley Deo video a couple of days ago, and I don't know how many of you out there have watched it, but it was totally weird for me like totally weird. And one of his major demonstrations is like this. Essentially, he starts with this picture of water that's hit a surface of water, and it produces the splash droplet coming up. And it's like, I have literally stared at that for nearly 30 years. It's the center of my coffee table in my lounge, which it's the most important piece of furniture I've ever bought. And I contemplate that all of the time. And of course, I came up with this theory of the vortex in the water droplets, and then I find this rush, and and that's why I have this thing.
Yeah.
And I do that experiment, but it's actually Dave that sent that to me initially, and then I came up with this theory, and then there was this Russian paper that I came across which actually talked about these little vortices causing the droplets to come out of the water, and I thought, how did the Americans never get this? And then I actually went to explain how when you rotate these, if they were like, when they jump up, they don't always come straight back down. They might come down and fall down on their side, and in which case they're shooting across the water. And if there's one shooting in its vortexes and they hit each other, they're going to reflect off each other. He freaking said that in the video as well. And I'm going, maybe this is the guy I was remote viewing. I don't know. But like I say, as a catch-all, I say I'm not inventing anything. I'm just realizing stuff. For me, the key moment was seeing that structure in Suhas Ralkar's lab in 2017. And apparently that video wasn't published till August 2020. So, like, what gives? Obviously, he said it sooner. He must have thought it even sooner than he said it in 2005 in the Roswell conference. Bizarre. If you haven't seen it, go and see it. It could be me talking in front of that microphone, actually. I can't understand the little thing that he's got, this kind of mock-up with loads of kind of, that they look like chokes or something on a bit of ferrite with a rod coming out. They look like maybe a kind of weird kind of Tesla coil, like loads of them, but not in some sort of grid. I don't know what's going on there. He says this is a working device, and I can't work out whether he's saying it does levitation or something. I don't know, but like, I didn't see much more about it ever in any other thing. Well, not that I've looked. What I mean is, I saw it on 2 days ago, but I've never seen anything similar. So I don't know whether that is actually a real thing. It doesn't track with my understanding anyway.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
Yeah. A lot of what he says, it's really spooky. What?
Yeah.
Over and over again, he says things that I could have said.
Yeah.
But I'd seen the other video, or rather, I shared the other video talking about magnetohydrodynamics. I saw that a couple of months back. I did a blog with it. I included some of it. That was weird in its own right. This is the way it works. Literally in this video, he says all of these devices work because they produce a tornado. It comes in, it produces a ring tornado. But yeah. Okay, I'm going to check if there's any questions on YouTube. I will post the link. So does anyone know where the full interview was posted? I don't know what you're talking about there. Okay, if anyone wants to ask any questions, just because I'm going to be there, a number of years ago, I went to Cyprus, which was the first place the Knights Templar / Knights Hospitalier set up shop. Last year, you might know by now that I put the family through searing heat in Malta. And for a few days this Easter next week, I will be going to Rhodes, which is actually where the Knights Hospitalier spent most of their time. But of course, as far as I'm aware, there is no ancient temples from a megalithic culture on Rhodes. I have shared an image in many presentations of a bowl from the British Museum, which shows, I think it's about 670 or around 5 to 700 BC, which shows the symbol of God controlled power, but it represented in much more artistic form. So I do expect to see some nice things in the museums there. I'm convinced now. So for those that might have seen my Little Bit Crazy too, or that on the island of Malta, where they sighted Valletta, the fort of Valletta, they did that on the top of an old temple. I think they had seen, and it might have been the most important temple, that actual peninsula, that island, jutland, this jutting out piece of land, which has a deep water port on one side and a deep water port on the other side, that Valletta has. That is probably where an ancient culture would see as one of the most important places to put a big temple. So the fact that Haltarkshin is so near to Valletta, in fact, it's walking distance within 40 minutes or something from the main now. Well, not even that actually, from the walls of Valletta, 20 minutes, maybe. The fact that that is so close, Haltarkshin, and other key areas around both Malta and Gozo have these ancient megalithic structures on, I'm pretty certain that where Valletta is sited, they would have had one of these structures. And the reality is, Christians and so forth, they've been building their religious structures or their fortresses on top of old religious structures for time immemorial. It's what people do. And so I think that regardless of the fact that many of the other megalithic structures were discovered, so-called, around the turn of the 1800s into 1900s, I think probably many, many hundreds of years ago, they found a big temple there, probably with a range of artifacts, and maybe hushed it up. That's my speculation, and I'm going to keep to it. Okay. I am probably going to call it a night if no one else has any questions. It's nearly 10 to 1 here. Anyone? Have I still got a connection? Am I talking to myself? I definitely am talking to myself.
All good.
You're still
all
there.
good. All right. Excellent. Good. Yeah, so if anyone is in Rhodes over Easter, then look me up. It would be great to see you. If not, I might combine all of the information from those 3 places in my Cosmic Summit, or I might just talk about teleportation. I haven't discussed it enough with my wife and colleagues. And I want to just do a shout out to a Free Life Taz who gave a $20 donation on YouTube. Thank you very much for that. That really helps. Okay, that's it from me. So thanks, guys. Thank you for your great contributions, Alex and Paul, today. Really enjoyed those. And I will see you guys soon. I'll see you even
Thanks for having us.
Hey, cheers, guys. Cheers.